right, welcome to the All About PA podcast, where we talk about anything and everything in Pennsylvania. My name is Reinys.
And I'm Chandler, and this is All About PA.
And to kick us off, we're going to start with some hot trends that are happening in Pennsylvania, such as PA sports are being impacted by the budget cuts. Governor Shapiro says that there will be no state money for sport venues. And the American Red Cross shares advice to prepare amid Western Pennsylvania extreme heat warning. So stay cool out there.
I'm definitely feeling the heat out here.
Yeah.
In other news, the Philadelphia 76ers drafted dynamic guard VJ Edgecombe to help bounce back from the disappointment of last season. Very excited to see
Fingers
how they
crossed.
perform. Yeah, fingers crossed. In some fun facts, the newly nominated for mayor, Zorhan of New York City, his dad actually got his political science degree here at the University of Pittsburgh.
All
So
right.
we'll say he's an honorary Pennsylvanian for that
Yeah.
one.
I think that counts. And for our next segment, in 1 in 2560, we are going to talk about a awesome place that we can spotlight here in Pennsylvania called Northumberland County. It is known as the mother of counties due to its history as a source of land for creating 29 other counties.
Wow,
That's
interesting.
insane. Yeah, the discovery of the county can be traced back to 1772. It is noted for being one of the 10 original counties in PA, and it was named after a county in northern England. Definitely see that happening in 1772.
Yeah, that's just like York and Lancaster counties are also named after places in England.
Yeah, PA is filled of historic counties and cities. It's really cool to learn more about them. One of the things that popped out from this county is that it also has seen industries like the silk, the dairy, dress factories, and more recently, oil drilling, and synthetic textiles, which is also something very common on the older counties in Pennsylvania. And is also home of the Knoebels Amusement Park, which I'd like to say that I performed there in 2017, way back.
You performed there?
Yes, I did. It is one of the coolest parks that I've been to, and I've been to some, around Pennsylvania, but Knoebels is very highlighted park. It is a family starting park. And yeah, I performed there right after graduating college. It's all but a blur now, but it was one of the most funnest summers ever. I stayed in Mount Carmel, which is also part of Northumberland County, and I also stayed at Shamokin as well. It
Okay,
was just
yeah.
really cool. It was really cool experience.
I haven't been to Knoebels in like a long time. Like I don't even really remember it. I remember having fun, but not much else.
The one thing that I do remember from Knoebels is that every time it rains, the park gets flooded, like severely flooded. I remember I was there and we had to like evacuate the whole park because of just harsh rainfalls. But another thing that's also one of my favorites is their ice cream. It is the most delicious ice cream I've
Mm,
ever tasted in my life. Like
that sounds awesome. I
it's
could go for that right
I
now.
can't even describe how it's just like milky goodness. It's the best. It's the best. They're also noted for their council buying homes for refugees fleeing from conflict. How about that?
Wow.
I think that's
Really?
pretty admirable. Yeah. Yeah.
That's awesome. I mean, you love to see these stories of like, these feel good stories about towns and communities coming together to help out others in times of need, times of struggle. So that's awesome.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I think
I'll have
that's
to I'll have to get back out to Knoebels at some point.
must.
Speaking of welcoming small towns, I'll be spotlighting the town of Lititz in Lancaster County. It's been frequently awarded, and not just by me, but by like huge like publications and magazines. Budget Travel awarded it the coolest small town in America.
Okay.
Fodor's named it the most charming main street in the United States. And it's honestly, it's so well deserved. I mean, it's really just beautiful. They're the home of Wilbur's Chocolate Company, a really old and historic local chocolate company. Not as famous as Hershey's, but I would say
I thought
better.
Hershey's was the only one, but it's nice to hear that there's options. Okay.
Oh yeah, their Wilbur buds are like a staple around Lancaster County. They're so good. Better than a Hershey Kiss, I will say.
Whoa. Don't
Yeah.
beat him up in the comments, you guys.
No. I like them both, but the Wilbur's factory is actually right next to the beautiful park that's right downtown, right along the old railroad. And actually, across Main Street on the other side of the railroad, it was converted into a rail trail that extends for I think 8 miles back towards my hometown of Ephrata. So, yeah, so I would spend a lot of summers growing up biking from my house all the way out to Lititz, stopping by the chocolate factory, walking around the park. It was beautiful. It is well worth the trip. They have a lot of events. In the winter, they have a fire and ice sculpture festival, which is really, really cool, even if you have to brave the cold.
Right. That sounds so cool, though.
It is really neat. It's they have all these ice sculptures and everything, and then a lot of the local businesses have the heat lamps outside, and they're doing stuff. It's really cool. Lititz is also really well known for their Rock Lititz Performance Center. Yeah, and a lot of big names have performed there. Wiz Khalifa, Mount Joy, Beyonce, BTS, and Sabrina Carpenter have all rehearsed there at some point.
It's always the small towns. I think they do this on purpose. That they do because I know Beyonce doesn't like to show people what she's doing until it's done.
Yeah,
it's always the small towns that have these really cool historic performances.
And I've always forgotten that it's there because it felt such a normal part of everyday life,
you're
kind
up
of
the street.
Yeah. So then I always forget that people are oh, you're near Rock Lititz, where Beyonce rehearsed and stuff like that.
Gosh,
so
every time.
Yeah, I honestly have never been there.
I think I'm adding this to my Lancaster track when I visit because this is too iconic. I must.
It is really neat. Josh Shapiro had his inauguration party there when he was inaugurated back in 2023. Wow. So, yeah, Lititz has some clout for being a small town. It also is very welcoming. Nice. They do a lot for their marginalized communities, especially refugee communities. So, it is such a beautiful and very just nice town to be in. I really, really enjoy it.
I love that. I love that they're welcoming and open. It's always it's also very good for just smaller cities, smaller counties to put themselves on the map. And so many really cool things that you just mentioned. Rock Lititz having the performers. I love a town that has summer festival vibes, and I feel that's what Rock Lititz is. You just see a bunch of small. I can't wait to go. I'm excited.
Yeah, it's growing up in Lancaster, I was oh, there's nothing to do around here. But now thinking back, I'm that's just because it felt so ordinary to me. Right. The extraordinary became ordinary to me from living there for so long. But now I'm man, yeah, there really are a lot of nice places like that. So yeah, definitely recommend a visit.
On my list.
All right, and right before we get into our next segment, Meet a Neighbor, I do want to apologize. Had a bit of audio trouble in the first segment, but hopefully that is fixed now. We want to give you guys the best experience possible, of course. But yeah, we're moving into the Meet a Neighbor section, good stories about everyday Pennsylvanians, stepping up and meeting a need in their community. This week, I wanted to focus on a great story out of Erie. I saw this story in Spotlight, PA, about this group called Black Wallstreet, which started off as a Facebook group founded by a lady named Kyra Taylor, who is a co-founder of the group alongside her friends. And they used the page to connect local businesses and share events. And then in 2020, they turned the Facebook group into a nonprofit. So they run initiatives that they help prospective homeowners foster entrepreneurship and more. It's just, they really see that need and they meet it, especially, out in a place like Erie, where only 10% of residents are Black Pennsylvanians. And so they're doing a really great job of stepping up. They have a major initiative called the Pathway to Home Ownership program, which is like this free workshop that helps educate attendees on like budgeting, mortgages, and like all the other aspects of the home buying process.
Wow, that's amazing. Talk about innovation.
I know, it is really inspiring. Kyra Taylor, the co-founder, she said, "My goal is to see Black Erie rise into this great, wonderful, booming population here. But also my goal is to see Erie, the city that I fell in love with as a young child, reach its full potential." And to me, that quote really encapsulates that Pennsylvanian spirit, wanting to grow and have your community reach its full potential and just become the home, the neighborhood it can be. And so huge shout out to them for doing that. It's crazy. It's crazy to think that something like a Facebook group can eventually become such a helpful nonprofit. That's just, it's just mind-blowing, right?
That's great. That is the coolest thing. If you really think about it, you often have like a lot of people wondering where things are located in their towns or in their cities, and this is just like one of the things that can serve as testament that there's space for everyone. There's space for everyone to develop something as simple as a Facebook page into a huge organization because of the way that people come together and what comes out of that. That's amazing. I'm going to be looking into that. I mean, I'm not in Erie, but, it's just, I want to learn too. I want to learn resources and how to, better budget or just mortgages. What?
I know. I'm not familiar at all with mortgages. Like,
what are the options? Like, what do you do when this happens? What do you do when that happens? I feel like a lot of people would really benefit from just knowing, where they are in whatever place they are, whether they don't have any mortgages or they have mortgages, or, the cost of inflation is always unpredictable. So you don't know how people have been impacted with that. And, it's really good to have like that source so that people don't feel like, oh my gosh, I'm going to lose my house kind of thing. Like there's any steps that they can like take to, I love it. I love it all. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Shout out to Kyra Taylor.
Yeah. And it's like about stepping up and, sometimes when there isn't that space, making that space yourself is just really inspiring to see. So keep it up.
Yeah, I want to see that in many cities of Pennsylvania. I want to see that in Allentown. I want to see that in Philly. Another one, actually, talking about people stepping up for their community and kind of like innovating things that haven't been heard of or existed before to provide just like a way for people to come together. Shout out to Sarah Gordon. She is acknowledged for creating a shush-free, stress-free family theater experience in Philadelphia. I think that was like the craziest thing I've ever read. Pause for the shush-free and stress-free, because if you're a parent, then you understand how difficult it is to even go out to see a movie and get babysitting taken care of. Sometimes you're just like, oh my gosh, it's too much.
I used to work at a movie theater. I used to work at a theater. I can only imagine.
And sometimes you just, you're like, what, I'll just buy the movie when it comes out. I can't, their comfort zone. But Sarah makes it very, very easy for people to actually, for those needs to be met. The Philly children's theater has drawn headlines for sensory-friendly and interactive performances. And it has a pay-what-you-can approach. It has free childcare services while you're in there. I think it's the most beautiful thing I've seen in a while. The fact that you can just pay what you can. So it's very, very welcoming for all types of families, for wherever you come from. There was no dedicated children's theater in Philadelphia before Sarah Gordon and her team kind of like started and made it happen. Yeah, which is, I've never heard of something like that. And I feel like just putting it out there that they have a sensory-friendly and interactive performances so that kids could just be kids and touch if they want to touch things and see what happens and just be part of the whole thing. I think that was very beautiful to learn that there's places like this that exist that kind of like blend two worlds together, movie theater experience with like hands-on interactive experiences with kids. I think that's beautiful. And there's, you're less limited. And I think that was really cool. It didn't exist, and now it's headed to its third summer season.
Wow.
They have, I think they're building up that, it's the same thing. Like they're building up from something, small and simple, an idea, and now, they're running, they're being, people are asking more from it. They want to see more of it. The same goal that they've had is making the arts accessible to children and families all over Philadelphia. So I think that's also really great that we're watching that like just grow and see what comes from that. Maybe we could like see that in other parts of Pennsylvania. But huge shout out to Sarah Gordon. The theater does performances for school groups. Often they perform in parks. They have one specific one tailored with children with disabilities, and their performances are held across neighborhoods in Philadelphia. They've partnered already with organizations like the Center for Autism and the HMS School for Children with Cerebral Palsy. But yeah, her ultimate goal was just making theater tangible and familiar and easy for just communities.
That is so inspiring to hear. That's awesome.
Shout out to these do-gooders and good neighbors in Pennsylvania. You guys keep doing the thing. Making
Pennsylvania better one day at a time.
And now for our next segment, What in the PA? We have a special guest who is back in our pod to talk a little bit more about courts discussion. Everybody, JJ Abbott.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? Thanks for having me again.
So yeah, thanks so much for coming back, JJ. We had such a great discussion last time you were on, and now we want to have, we have a couple questions about this year's elections. They're kind of confusing me, to be honest. I mean, Pennsylvania is like unique in the way that we elect our highest courts. Not many states in the country do that. So like, how exactly does this year's judicial election work?
Yeah, so Pennsylvania is one of just a few states that does elect its judges, and then we have an even more unique feature, which is we also get to choose whether or not we keep them on the courts every 10 years. And so I think the uniqueness is really that Pennsylvania voters have an incredible amount of power to be able to shape the kind of courts that we have by selecting judges that align with the values that Pennsylvanians want to have in the justice system, in how our laws and politicians are held accountable, and how people's rights particularly under the Pennsylvania Constitution, which is in some ways even better than the U.S. Constitution in terms of how expansive some of the rights that we're guaranteed. It's important because these it's really up to us, right? We are deciding. I'm sure we'll talk a little more, but there's some bad guys out there that want to spend a lot of money to influence our courts. And so if we're not on the ball, we're not, as voters, as folks that are talking to our friends and neighbors about this, we can lose out on that power. But at the end of the day, we get to decide. And so it's, this year, is a kind of a unique one, because in addition to electing some judges in head-to-head races, we also have the most important retention election in arguably in history, where 3 different judges are in the Supreme Court are on the ballot for a yes or no vote, and we can talk a little bit more how that works. But it's really consequential, and not a lot of folks are familiar with this. So as folks who are more engaged, or if you care about courts and how they impact you, which is extensive, then we have to be reminding folks that these elections are happening, and there's a big role for every one of us to play in making sure we do that.
Yeah. And talking about, the fact that we are heading into a very tough and very impactful election, can you tell us a little bit more about what's at stake for Pennsylvanians? Like, why should they need to be involved and notified about all this stuff that's happening?
Yeah, I mean, courts have such a big impact on all of us. And, we're all feeling that, around the Supreme Court in Washington. And so there's so much we are hearing in the news about the U.S. Supreme Court, and the Pennsylvania Supreme Court has even more direct impact on our daily lives. And a lot of the things that we're upset about the U.S. Supreme Court doing ultimately push even more responsibility down to our state court. And so the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is the highest court. It is in many ways the last line of defense for our rights, our freedoms, a lot of the way that we are protected from politicians who aren't serving our interests, laws that violate our rights or take away something that we had before in terms of protections. And so the courts over the last decade, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court's been controlled by the same majority of judges that are on the ballot this year for the last decade. And there's been this seismic shift in terms of how Pennsylvanians have been impacted. They really took on corruption in Harrisburg and struck down these legislative and congressional maps that were absolutely embarrassing in terms of how gerrymandered they were by the politicians that made them. They protected and expanded our rights under the law by reinforcing things in the Constitution, like our right in Pennsylvania to clean air and clean water, our right in Pennsylvania under the Constitution to fairly funded and equitable schools. And also when you think about things like Roe v. Wade and all these big things happen at the national level, this Supreme Court has been exactly the opposite. They've stood up for abortion rights. They've taken on corporations to hold them accountable instead of letting them off the hook. And they've stood up for workers' rights, for tenants' rights, for environmental rights. And so it's really tangible how they've impacted us. It may not be like the top headline in every on every site, or it might not be showing up in our feeds, but it couldn't be more important. And so, what's at stake is really the future of Pennsylvania. Do we keep having a sort of a backstop against these attacks on our freedoms? Do we keep having a court that stands up for workers and patients and consumers? Or, do we go backwards? We had a court for a long time that let the politicians in Harrisburg draw the maps however they wanted, let corporations take advantage of us when it comes to the environment and the healthcare system and as our employers. And so this is a big choice. There's going to be some names on the ballot, 3 Supreme Court justices, but it's really a bigger choice for Pennsylvania about the kind of court that they want, the kind of future that they want. And so it's really important that we're all starting to talk to our friends and neighbors and get involved in this fight.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great that we have a court here in Pennsylvania that will fight for fully funded schools, clean environment, better education for our kids, taking on corporations and greedy billionaires. But I guess why do billionaires and these special interests care so much about our state courts to begin with? They feel like, I get why billionaires like Jeffrey Yass and Elon Musk would spend so much money on like a presidential election, but why are they trying to come to PA and mess with our state courts?
It's a great question because we've seen this lurch, over the last few years or few decades where our judicial races were usually pretty sleepy. They weren't super political. We relied on things like credentials, instead of ideology. Does this person have a track record on deciding big cases and doing the right thing? And now they've really been polarized. Our state courts, very much in a similar way that they have nationally, and those two things are really connected. There is I'm not a big conspiracy guy, but there is literally a group of people with a lot of money who have identified federal and state courts as a means to an end, right? Whether that's making more money. There's the richest man in Pennsylvania, ProPublica, wrote an entire story about how he has used the court system and litigation in order to lower his taxes. And then last cycle in 2023, he was the biggest donor, over $6 million, to one of the candidates that was running for a state Supreme Court in Pennsylvania. Wow. Elon Musk, I think, was the biggest donor in Wisconsin. And that was just back in April. He spent over $20 million trying to get the Republican candidate elected. He lost, but he was very clear why he did it. He understood that in states like Wisconsin and Pennsylvania, the judges are the ultimate backstop against these congressional maps. And so if the politicians who Elon Musk benefits from are able to put maps in place that elect more of them, right? And then they're able to get those maps through the court because they have a favorable judge. That he said this out loud on the record, like he wanted to control the redistricting. That's why he spent all the money. And they're not alone, right? There are it's not a huge group, but it's like they have a lot of money. These group of folks, both billionaires and then these special interests. And I think on the interest side, right, and this is all, they're all connected, but it's because the issue set is so big and robust and impactful in terms of how state Supreme Courts impact all the citizens and the laws that we have here in Pennsylvania. So the same reasons why we want to, as folks who believe in reproductive freedom and workers' rights and a fair economy and strong democracy and the rule of law, we understand how important these courts are. They understand it too because they're trying to take advantage of all of those things, and that's why in Washington these same folks have been able to put folks on the U.S. Supreme Court and on the federal courts, and they've been able to chip away on an ideological level on people's fundamental rights. And we just saw that happen with this round of SCOTUS cases. And then they've also, been able to make a lot more money, right? Do business more without guardrails to, gut the Voting Rights Act, to take away environmental rights, to undermine workers' rights. And that gives more power to the people ultimately who put them there. And so, but the great thing, as we said about Pennsylvania, is that ultimately it's up to us. We can just ignore all these people and we can go out and we can talk to we can't ignore what they do because we got to fight back against it, but we can go and talk to people in our networks and we can get the message out in every way that we can about why it's so, what the truth is about why these elections are so important and how courts impact people.
Agree with that. I think that focusing back on PA and giving power back to the voters, they can go out there and either ask all the questions or just talk about it, inform people what's going on. What does this election, this is kind of like a follow-up question to what you were saying, JJ. What does this election mean with the moments that we're federally in with Trump and SCOTUS, highlighting all the recent decisions that they've made?
it couldn't be more important. It couldn't be more connected. All the folks that are getting out there and doing amazing work to hold the folks in Washington accountable, from the White House to Congress to the Supreme Court. We've seen these huge rushes of folks taking to the streets, going to events, going and holding their representatives accountable around a host of things, from the issues that are most important to people's daily lives to the principles of our country and our values that are so important. Those are exactly connected here and to this election in 2025. And I think it's a really great way for folks that are feeling like, what can I do, in this moment that's important? You can get involved. There's going to be all sorts of ways that people are going to be focusing on this election. You can join a local organizing group that's going to be helping to get out the vote or register people to vote. You can check in with your friends and family and get them to make sure they're engaged in the election. You can just share stuff on your platforms to make sure that more and more people know that this election's happening, that it's really important. And so, I think we're seeing at the national level, just seeing the U.S. Supreme Court, again, attack reproductive rights and put more responsibility, right? Each of these cases, the case today allowing states to defund Planned Parenthood and Roe v. Wade, which left abortion rights up to individual states. Both of those make this election even more important, because ultimately this court, our state Supreme Court, is going to decide whether or not people in Pennsylvania have a right under our Constitution to seek the care that they want and that their doctors believe is appropriate. So. And then you think about the case that we're just hearing about that just came out on the injunctions and rule of law and birthright citizenship. We are at risk of having the rule of law the similar way that the federal courts are allowing Trump to seize more power and to do a lot of damage. Like, we could be in a position very quickly here in Pennsylvania in just a couple years where we have a different majority on the PA Supreme Court that's doing the exact same thing here. And so it couldn't be more connected to the moment that we're in. It couldn't be more important that people who are getting involved or around holding these folks accountable are also getting out and talking to their neighbors about this election. And so, I think there's so much that each of us can do, and we have so much power uniquely, as we talked about here in Pennsylvania, to be able to make an impact.
Yeah, and as we run up on time, just one quick question. I saw Vote.pa's social media was asking people if they had any questions about this election, and I saw one comment asking, how much power do our courts have against federal overreach, and just how do our courts come into play with actions from the Trump administration?
Well, one thing a really good connection is if you think about abortion rights. So, we've seen both the Trump administration and the Supreme Court and Trump's Supreme Court majority come after people's abortion rights. Right now, there's a case in Pennsylvania that's going through the courts that will decide potentially whether people have a right under the Pennsylvania Constitution. So the U.S. Supreme Court has said that you do not have a federal constitutional right to get abortion care or certain types of reproductive care. But the PA Supreme Court has said it thinks that it is appropriate for a case to decide whether or not that is the case, because there is so much potential precedent that Pennsylvania Constitution does. But the alarming thing is that case is just starting to move through the courts here in Pennsylvania, and it has to work its way up to the PA Supreme Court. So we don't know, if that case is going to reach the PA Supreme Court and when. But ultimately, it could be decided differently depending on the outcome of this election. And so we want to, the folks that are on the court now have made clear that they support people's right to seek abortion care in Pennsylvania. They also have made abundantly clear that they disagree with the precedent that's been set at the federal level. And so we want to make sure that we have judges, if we care about that issue, we want to make sure we have judges there that are going to do the right thing under our Constitution and protect people's access to that health care. And so, that's just one way of many, but I think a lot of ways are that now more and more pressure is going to be at the state level to protect our rights to, hold big corporations and bad actors accountable through the legal system. And our state Supreme Court is going to be the ultimate decider in all of those cases.
Awesome.
And one follow-up question before we leave. How can Pennsylvanians actually get involved directly with this?
Well, I think the first thing is, as Chandler mentioned, you can there's a great site that you can go to called vote.pa that you can text and send and just every day, all the people in your life that are Pennsylvania voters, and make sure that they're checking their registration, they're making a plan to vote, and then just start talking to your friends and your family, your neighbors, and get involved. As I said, join an organizing group, share good information online. Hit up all those group chats where everybody's talking about something else. Send them some information about the election. It's really important that we're just starting to make the connection with people that we know about things that matter to them, so that we can make the case that this is going to be a really important moment for Pennsylvania.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much, JJ, for coming on and answering all of our questions about this complicated election we've got this fall.
Thanks so much, and a pleasure to be here.
Thanks, JJ. Well, everybody, that's all for today, PA. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Chandler.
And my name is Reinys, and we'll be back soon. We are everywhere where you get your podcasts. Follow us on X, IG, Facebook, Blue Sky, and TikTok at All About PA to keep up with all the things Pennsylvania and when we drop our next episode. Thank you all so much.